Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Maliki yawmiddin. So, Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad. We always try to focus in on the spiritual aspect as we're starting. So we begin in the name of God, most merciful and compassionate. And that's more than appropriate for all sessions, but particularly today, because we're going to talk about the positive. And Hadi's going to cough when I'm losing focus. Okay, well, it doesn't matter. We'll include it. We'll add an element of humanism in it. You know, this is a total aside, but when we watch a lot of interviews in television, etc., they're always obsessed with the time. The person being interviewed could be telling people life-saving information, and yet, oh, sorry, we only have 15 seconds for you to tell 100,000 people how to save their lives. 9, 8, 7, 6. So this is part of the, to use a Yiddish word, mishigas, craziness of the modern world and its time obsessiveness. Okay, so today we're talking positive. Over the last couple of weeks, we talked about the negative, i.e., the klishas, desire, anger, fear, doubt, laziness, and agitation. Those are the obstacles that we have to overcome. Today we're going to talk about the stations that we have to aim for, the positive states that we're aiming for. This teaching comes, I believe, although I haven't been able to verify, but I believe this teaching comes from Abu Ghani al-Nabulsi, a famous Sufi and scholar from Damascus. Had a beautiful center there in Damascus when I was there. So Abu Ghani talks about, Sheikh Abu Ghani talks about 28 different stations. The stations of the nafs that we talked about in our Quran class, and we may cover in these tapes also. The stations of the ego, that is, the stations of the heart, qalb, the stations of the soul, ruh, and the stations of the secret, sir. Now today we're talking about the stations of the heart. The heart is the turning point. Everything turns around the heart. So if we go right or we go wrong, it's because of the state of our heart. So it's absolutely fundamental to get these states right. And we'll talk about what that means. Station 1. You want to guess? It's right over here. Okay. So if people, I don't know, are people able to see
Yes.
in the screen, or you have to move it around a bit? Okay. So the first station is the station of at-tawbah. That's Arabic meaning turning around, or we could translate it as repentance. And in order to do that turning around, you have to be aware. Okay? You have to be aware of where you're doing things wrong. Okay? We believe, and believers in general believe, that we have to answer to Allah, to God. If someone is more on the agnostic spectrum, no relationship to ASD, if you're on the agnostic spectrum, then you can think of this as personal faults or defects. But in either case, you have, in order to change this, you have to be aware. Okay. If you need a counter-example here, I like the Shakespearean idea of the foil. The foil tells you what you don't want to be. Okay, we all have foils in our life. If we look around, Allah sends us people to show us what we don't want to be. Okay. And so on this level, we could take most politicians, but let's take Trump on this one. For someone who's unaware when he's making a mistake, at least he never admits it anyway. So this is what we don't want to be. We want to be aware and admit it. Now, yesterday, so happens, I was watching a very interesting interview with Mohammed bin Salman. I don't know, did you get to watch that, Imran? It was on Fox News. It's very interesting. And one of the things he seemed to be doing, although it could be a political maneuver, but admitting mistakes, including, for example, what happened with Khashoggi. I don't believe it was a mistake, but he claims it was a mistake. And it's not impossible. For example, it's quite possible that he ordered Khashoggi to be kidnapped and brought back to Saudi Arabia. I think that's what they really wanted, where they could do a show trial. And the people who were doing this operation met some resistance and killed him instead. It's possible. But it's also possible that he was lying. But in any case, in a few different places, he talked about some of the things that happened before 9/11. He was willing to admit some errors that the Saudis have done and say he's trying to correct things. It was about a man being imprisoned and sentenced to death for some tweet he had made, and he again said this is not right. Okay, whether he's sincere or not, Allah knows best, but we have to be willing to admit mistakes, okay, when we get things wrong. And specifically for believers, we have to be willing to admit sinful mistakes. Okay, I did this, I shouldn't do that, you know. This attractive woman walked by me and I checked her out, astaghfirullah. Okay, we have to catch ourselves doing the wrong. I saw this property and I dreamt all night, wouldn't I ever be happy if I had this property? Okay, these are all mistakes. And the rest that we won't go into the details of. We all make mistakes. So at Tawbah, we admit our mistakes, firstly to God, firstly maybe to ourselves and to God, and then we try to design a way to avoid those in the future. There are several elements of this Tawbah, according to the scholars. First, you have to realize you make a mistake. Then you have to feel bad about the mistake. And then you have to decide not to do it again, to never do it again. Those are at least three of the elements of a tawbah. You admit your mistake, you feel bad about it, and you intend not to make it again. Which is very different from when I was in India. I saw people came from the Gulf, some of the Muslims came from the Gulf, and they came to a hotel where there were prostitutes there. And they would do this every year. They would drink, they would hire prostitutes, and on the way back, that's what someone explained to me, they would make tawbah. Every year they would do the same thing, and they make tawbah and go, okay, now I'm clean, now I can do it again next year. That's not really tawbah. That's hypocrisy. The second one, and this one is particularly important, I think, for Westerners, taslim. Taslim meaning surrender. Okay, now the opposite, so each of these we could look at the opposite as well. The opposite of a taslim is, okay, so taslim is surrender, submission. The opposite is hubris or arrogance. So we think there are a lot of people out there that think they know better than God. They know better than Allah. No child of 2 years old should die. They know better than Allah. It was ordained this child was going to die at that point. No child should die. We know better than God what should happen. You know, no country should have earthquakes like Haiti. You know that? Some of the recent examples of hubris, for example, if we look, two examples come to mind, both American. Okay? First was the invasion of Iraq. Now, everyone believes that most people believe that the Americans invaded Iraq to get control over the oil. Okay, that's I call that theory economic paranoia. Okay, it's very common in Western countries to believe there's only one sin left: greed. No other sins are present. But actually, in my own opinion, there was much more than oil involved, and the major factor was hubris. Why hubris? There were people, neocons and others, who believed they could convert Iraqi society to a veritable democracy, and that all the Iraqi people would get together once Saddam Hussein was gone, and they would form this wonderful democracy that would then be an example and would have a domino effect on the rest of the Middle East, and we convert the entire area to democracy. That is hubris. That is lack of wisdom. I'm sure they had people telling them the contrary. People who study the political science of the area and the history of the area knew this wouldn't happen, but there were people who believed it out of hubris. The other example, another American example of hubris, the opposite of taslim, is Bill Gates. First of all, Bill Gates was going to solve the entire health problem of Africa by developing more and more vaccines. For every illness, he was going to develop a new vaccine and solve the problem of sickness and early death in Africa. Hubris. Now, he was talking about geoengineering. He's going to put up particles into the atmosphere that are going to block the sun, so we'll solve the problem of global warming. Hubris. Trying to clone human beings, which has been done in some places, trying at least, is hubris. And the other place we see this also is the lack of surrender, to death. So I was mentioning the other time that I saw a documentary. There was this 40-year-old California guy, of course he had to be from California, who was doing all his biological parameters to figure out a way that his cells would stop aging. And he was convinced he could do it. And then he can live forever because he'll never age. Hubris. All of these are a lack of surrender to the will of Allah. And we have to work as believers, as spiritual seekers, in the opposite direction, to surrender to reality and accept it. The next station, so that's the station of surrender, the station of adab. Now, this is one that I have a bit of difficulty with, because although it's true that you have to have the right behavior in all situations, the danger of this, the societies that put a premium on adab can very easily become hypocritical. They can outwardly be polite and diplomatic and inwardly be completely corrupt and not in sync with their own outward behavior. So, but on the other hand, again, I'm starting to sound like an Arabic teacher. They work a lot with antonyms, with opposites. Did you ever get that far in studying Arabic? They like to do opposites. It's good. The opposite of adab is what's going on in our schools in the Western world. So I remember a teacher saying that she loved her job, but now she hated it because the students were so badly behaved, and in school there was no consequence unless one of the students hit their teacher. Physical violence was the standard by which there would be consequences. So the student could say the most obnoxious things to the teacher, use swear words to the teacher, no consequences unless they they actually got involved in physical violence. Okay. So this is what Sheikh Nazim used to call adapsis, no adab. Okay, and he would catch some of his murids with lack of adab. So it's an important concept, but it can be carried too far. We have to be careful. Okay. Al-khawf is kind of the opposite of what we were saying about the schools. Fear is an important station. In the Quran, you'll find a lot of statements that are designed to they brought the timer and didn't put it on. Okay. 10 minutes?
5 minutes.
5 minutes will give me 20 minutes.
Yes.
Okay. Excuse that we're still working out the glitches here. Okay. So fear is very unpopular. It's very politically incorrect to determine people's behavior by fear. But it's totally necessary at the same time. So the Sufis teach that we travel on this path on two wings, hope and fear. Our society is very hypocritical about that. Parents are not allowed to frighten their children, but the police officers carry guns and sticks, and the economic institutions keep threatening you, if you don't pay your bills on time, we're going to cut your services. Just two examples of how we still need the fear in our society. Now, if a parent says, if you continue this, I'm going to beat you up, in Western society, the children can go to the Children's Welfare Society, here we call it in Quebec DPG, and they can complain, and the social workers can swoop down and take away the child because you threaten them. So they don't allow you to use fear. But the clever parents understand that if they tell the child, look, if they come and they take you out of here, you're not going to like where they take you to. Because they'll get involved in one of these loveless foster homes with strict rules, no money, and very mediocre food. So it shouldn't work. But the children are taught even in our wonderful counter-educational schools that if your parent threatens anyone, and I've seen many cases like this, then you can call the social workers and they'll take you out of the house. Good luck. To quote Bob Dylan, he just said, good luck in that process. Number 5 is a sidq. Most people know this term from Abu Bakr Siddiq. Someone of truthfulness and sincerity. We're supposed to, on this path, learn to be truthful as much as possible. We don't have to be idiotic about it. You know, the Buddhist teaching, for example, if a soldier from the enemy army comes and says, is your father here, knowing your father is in the opposition, you're supposed to tell him yes. This is foolishness. But Islam is the way of moderation. So this truthfulness is not absolute, but it's close to it. Our Prophet was asked, could someone drink and still be a Muslim? He said, yes. Could someone be involved in zina, fornication, and be a Muslim? Yes. He said, what if he doesn't tell the truth? He said, then he's no longer a Muslim. So we're, despite some of the behavior of some of the Muslims, we won't go into any specific national profiling, but it's okay, I'm under control. So we're supposed to be truthful. That means not spinning, not making concessions with the truth, not diluting it, as much as possible to stay within the spectrum of truth. Now, hakika, number 6, is an even higher level of truth. That refers to the absolute truth, the truth of Allah. Okay. As in the Quran, as in the hal of the Sufi, the Hakika is the highest level of truth. I was thinking about some future sessions, we're going to talk about Sufism, and the way I would define Sufism is the highest order. What is Sufism? The highest order of human endeavor. Why? Because we're looking to attain to both the absolute truth of Hakika and the truth, the relative truth of good character. We're working to perfect our character and to join in fusion with the highest order of truth or divine consciousness. Hakika. It's a very high state. And then the last one, the L word, very overused in our society, often used hypocritically, sometimes used manipulatively, but nevertheless, absolutely important to develop love. Love for Allah first, love for other people. When we have it, don't fake it. That should be considered a kabair, a great sin, to fake loving when you don't love. If you don't love, just be compassionate. You can be compassionate to anyone. You can be charitable to anyone. You can be kind to anyone. But love is a gift from the highest order, from the source. That's why people get addicted to love. It's the only connection they have with the absolute, with the divine. Sometimes the only connection people have is love. So they don't want to give it up, because sometimes it's detrimental. Maybe they're in love with an abusive person or a rejecting person. They have to drop it. But they don't want to, because it's their only connection with their Lord. Inshallah, through our practices and the teachings and our efforts, we can experience this love in a more generalized way, so it isn't directed just to one person, because then we can get into some serious trouble. So what do we do with these stations? I advise everyone, write them down and meditate, contemplate them, and see how much you can realize them. A tawbah. What have I done wrong? What do I need to ask forgiveness for? Starting with asking forgiveness from Allah. What do I need to try to correct? Am I too angry, too greedy, too lustful? Whatever. First, become aware of your shadow side, to use a Jungian expression. Then surrender to the reality. This reality is from Allah, not from anyone else. All this reality is from Allah. The bad weather is from Allah. The difficulties, the physical illnesses, it's all from, we can only surrender. It doesn't mean you don't seek out a doctor or medical help, but you have to accept that this is the test you've been given. Adab, in the four agreements of the Toltec teaching, it's talked about impeccable speech, impeccable behavior in every situation. We have to try to have, that's it, the appropriate behavior. That's the highest level of adab, is the appropriate behavior in every situation. Al-Khawf, yes, fear is part of the equation. Don't try to avoid it. It may guide you in the right way sometimes. It may protect you from evil. Be truthful. Impeccable speech, back to the Toltec teaching. Impeccable speech. Hakika, aim for the highest. As Sufis, we're aiming for the highest. The highest is absolute divine truth, but within the context of proper behavior, call it as you like, Sharia, divine law, being ethical. Hakika, within the context of divine law, mahabba, and we're thankful for any and all love that Allah has given us, because that is the greatest motivator. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun ala mursalin walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. And we'll see you next week. Excuse us for any technical glitches for now.